The rain fell in sheets, each drop a cold reminder of the world's indifference. Henry Grayson, hunched beneath a tattered awning, clutched a threadbare coat to his chest. At 65, his body ached with the weight of decades of labor, loss, and betrayal. The city of Riverton sprawled around him, its neon lights mocking his existence. Once, he'd been a man of promise, a factory worker with a steady hand and a hopeful heart. Now, the streets were his home, and the people who passed him were shadows, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the pavement. Henry's story wasn't always one of despair. 30 years ago, he'd worked at the steel mill, his hands calloused but strong, his laughter filling the break room. He'd had a wife, Clara, whose smile could light up the darkest days, and a daughter, Lily, who'd once called him her hero. But the mill closed, and with it went his stability. Clara's illness came next, draining their savings until she slipped away, leaving Henry with nothing but grief and a child to raise alone. He tried. God, he tried. But the world had a way of breaking even the strongest men. Lily grew distant, her teenage years marked by resentment. She blamed Henry for their poverty, for the nights they went hungry, for the mother she'd lost. When she turned 18, she left without a word, and Henry's heart shattered again. The bank took the house, and the streets took Henry. For years, he wandered, surviving on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers. But Riverton was a city that devoured its own, and Henry became invisible. Tonight, though, something stirred in him. He sat beneath the awning, watching the rain pool at his feet, and his eyes caught the reflection of a towering building across the street. The Grayson Tower, they called it now, though it hadn't always been so grand. Once, it was the old mill, the place where he'd poured his youth. Now, it was a sleek apartment complex, home to the city's elite people who'd never known hunger, who'd never felt the sting of betrayal. Henry's jaw tightened. They'd let him rot. All of them, the bosses who'd closed the mill, the bankers who'd taken his home, the daughter who'd walked away. But he wasn't done yet. The spark of defiance came from a memory, one he'd buried deep. Years ago, in a moment of desperation, he'd stumbled upon a small, forgotten plot of land behind the mill. It was worthless then, a patch of dirt no one wanted. But Henry had scraped together every penny he could, buying it for a pittance from a city auction. It was his last act of hope, a claim to something that could never be taken from him. He'd forgotten about it, lost in the haze of survival, until a letter arrived at the shelter last week. A developer wanted that land. It was prime real estate now, worth millions, and they were offering him a fortune. Henry's fingers trembled as he pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket. The rain had smeared the ink, but the numbers were clear: $10 million. He could sell and disappear, live comfortably for the rest of his days. But as he stared at the Grayson Tower, a different plan took root. He wouldn't sell. He'd build. He'd take that money and turn it into something they couldn't ignore. They'd let him rot, but he'd rise, and they'd pay for every single one of them. The next morning, Henry walked into the Riverton land office, his clothes damp but his resolve ironclad. The clerk, a young man with slick-back hair, barely looked up. "What do you want, old man?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Henry slid the letter across the counter. The clerk's eyes widened as he read it, and for the first time in years, Henry felt seen. "I'm here to claim what's mine," he said, his voice steady. The clerk stammered, but Henry didn't care. He had a plan, and it started with that plot of land. Over the next few weeks, Henry met with lawyers, developers, and architects. They were skeptical at first, their polished suits and clipped words a stark contrast to his worn jacket and unshaven face. But money spoke louder than appearances, and Henry had money, at least the promise of it. He sold a portion of the land to a rival developer, using the funds to finance his vision, a building that would rival the Grayson Tower, a monument to his survival. He called it the Phoenix, a name that burned in his chest like a vow. The work began slowly. Henry was no businessman, but he learned fast. He studied contracts, negotiated terms, and demanded respect. The architects marveled at his tenacity, the way he pored over blueprints with the same intensity he'd once used to weld steel. The Phoenix would be more than a building. It would be a home for those the city had forgotten, affordable apartments for the elderly, the struggling, the invisible. Henry would make sure no one else was left to rot. But the past wasn't done with him. One evening, as he reviewed plans at a coffee shop, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Lily. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes carrying the weight of years. She froze when she saw him, her lips parting as if to speak. But no words came. Henry's heart pounded, a mix of anger and longing. She'd abandoned him, left him to the streets. Yet here she was, standing in the warmth of the shop, looking at him like he was a ghost. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. Henry didn't move. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the pain in her eyes stopped him. She took a step closer, her hands trembling. "I thought you were gone," she said. "I thought you were dead." Henry's throat tightened. "You didn't look hard enough," he said, his voice low but sharp. Lily flinched, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Then she spoke again, her words halting. "I'm sorry. I was young, angry. I didn't know how to find you." Henry wanted to believe her, but trust was a luxury he'd lost long ago. Still, something in her voice stirred the embers of the father he'd once been. He didn't forgive her, not yet, but he didn't turn her away either. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We've got a lot to talk about." As they sat, the rain began again outside, softer this time, like a promise of something new. Henry didn't know if he could rebuild what was broken between them, but he knew one thing. He was no longer the man the world had discarded. The Phoenix was rising, and so was he. The coffee shop meeting with Lily lingered in Henry's mind like a bruise, tender and impossible to ignore. She'd stayed for hours, her words spilling out in a rush of guilt and regret. She told him of her life after she'd left, a string of bad relationships, a job that barely paid the bills, a constant ache for the family she'd abandoned. Henry listened, his face a mask of stoicism. But inside, he wrestled with a storm of emotions. Part of him wanted to hold her, to reclaim the daughter he'd lost. Another part wanted to walk away, to let her feel the sting of abandonment as he had. In the end, he did neither. He gave her his number and told her to call if she meant what she said. Then he returned to his work, to the Phoenix, because it was the only thing that felt solid. Construction on the Phoenix had begun, and the site was a chaos of cranes and concrete. Henry visited daily, his presence a quiet command. The workers, at first skeptical of the old man in the worn coat, soon respected him. He knew the value of their labor, having spent his life in their shoes. He brought them coffee, listened to their stories, and made sure they were paid fairly. The Phoenix wasn't just a building. It was a testament to those who'd been overlooked, and Henry was determined to get it right. But the city wasn't kind to dreamers, especially not to men like Henry. The Grayson Towers owners, a group of wealthy investors led by a man named Victor Crane, took notice of the Phoenix. Crane was everything Henry despised: polished, entitled, and ruthless. He'd been one of the executives who'd shut down the mill all those years ago, pocketing millions while workers like Henry lost everything. Now, Crane saw the Phoenix as a threat to his empire, a rival that could draw tenants away from his overpriced apartments. One afternoon, as Henry inspected the foundation work, a sleek black car pulled up to the site. Victor Crane stepped out, his suit gleaming in the sunlight, a smirk playing on his lips. "Henry Grayson," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I heard you were the one behind this project." He gestured at the construction site, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're out of your depth, old man. This city doesn't belong to people like you." Henry's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice calm. "It's my land, Crane. My building. You don't get to tell me what I can do." Crane laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can compete with me? I own half of Riverton. Your little charity project won't last a month." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Sell me the rest of your land, Grayson. Take the money and disappear. It's the only way this ends well for you." Henry met his gaze, unflinching. "You let me rot once. I'm not giving you a damn thing." Crane's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of anger. "You'll regret this," he said, then turned and walked back to his car. As the vehicle sped away, Henry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. Crane wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of everything that had broken Henry's life. But this time, Henry wasn't backing down. The threat lingered, but Henry threw himself into the Phoenix with renewed vigor. He worked with architects to refine the design, ensuring every apartment was accessible, with wide doorways and low counters for the elderly and disabled. He met with community leaders, promising affordable rents and a safe haven for those the city had forgotten. Word spread, and soon, people were stopping him on the street not to offer pity, but to thank him. An old woman pressed a loaf of bread into his hands, her eyes shining with gratitude. A young man, recently homeless, offered to help at the site for free. Henry's heart, so long hardened by betrayal, began to soften. Lily called a week later. Her voice was tentative, but she asked to meet again. This time, they went to the construction site. Henry showed her the blueprints, his voice alive with passion as he described the Phoenix's purpose. Lily listened, her eyes wide, and for the first time, Henry saw a spark of the girl she'd been. "You're really doing this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're building something good." "It's not just for me," Henry said, his gaze fixed on the rising steel beams. "It's for everyone who's been left behind." Lily reached for his hand, but he pulled away, not ready to bridge that gap. "I want to help," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but let me be part of this." Henry didn't answer right away. He wanted to trust her, but the wounds were deep. Still, he nodded. "Show up tomorrow," he said. "We'll see." As Lily left, Henry stood alone at the site, the hum of machinery filling the air. The Phoenix was more than a building now. It was a reckoning. Crane and his kind thought they could bury him, but Henry Grayson was no longer invisible. He was building a legacy, and no one, not Crane, not the past, not even his own doubts, would stop him. The Phoenix rose steadily, its steel skeleton piercing the Riverton skyline. Henry felt a quiet pride every time he saw it, but the weight of his past and the threats of the present kept him grounded. Victor Crane wasn't idle. Rumors swirled of zoning disputes, anonymous complaints to the city, and whispers of sabotage at the construction site. A shipment of materials went missing one night, and a worker reported seeing a man in a suit lingering near the site after hours. Henry knew who was behind it, but he had no proof, only instinct and a lifetime of being underestimated. Lily showed up the next day, as promised. She was hesitant at first, her hands fidgeting as she helped organize supplies and coordinate with volunteers. Henry watched her from a distance, torn between resentment and hope. She wasn't the angry teenager who'd left him, but she wasn't his little girl either. Still, her presence brought a flicker of warmth to his days. She worked hard, earning the respect of the crew, and when she laughed, it reminded Henry of Clara. He didn't know if he could forgive her, but he let her stay. The city's resistance grew as the Phoenix took shape. Bureaucrats, likely in Crane's pocket, threw up roadblocks, permits delayed, inspections scheduled at impossible times. Henry fought back with the tenacity of a man who'd survived the streets. He spent hours at City Hall, arguing his case, his voice hoarse but unwavering. He hired a sharp young lawyer, Maria, who'd grown up in Riverton's poorest neighborhood and understood Henry's mission. Together, they navigated the red tape. But each victory came at a cost: time, money, and energy Henry could barely spare. One evening, as Henry and Maria pored over legal documents in a cramped office, a brick crashed through the window. Glass shattered across the floor, and a note was tied to the brick: walk away, or you'll lose more than you're building. Henry's blood ran cold, but he refused to show fear. Maria, her face pale, picked up the note. "This is Crane," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "He's scared. Henry. That's why he's doing this." "Then let him be scared," Henry said, his jaw set. "I'm not stopping." Maria nodded, but her eyes held worry. "You're making enemies, Henry. Powerful ones. Be careful." Henry didn't sleep that night. He sat on a bench outside the construction site. The city's hum a distant roar. He thought of Clara, of the promises they'd made to build a better life. He thought of Lily, of the years they'd lost. And he thought of Crane, a man who'd never known struggle but thrived on others' pain. The Phoenix wasn't just a building anymore. It was a fight for dignity, for every person the city had discarded. The next morning, Henry doubled security at the site. He hired guards, installed cameras, and met with the crew to ensure their safety. The workers rallied around him, their loyalty a quiet rebellion against Crane's influence. But the pressure was mounting. Costs were rising, and the funds from the land sale were dwindling. Henry needed investors, but he refused to compromise his vision. The Phoenix would remain affordable, a haven for those who needed it most. Lily proved invaluable in those tense weeks. She had a knack for organization, streamlining schedules and negotiating with suppliers. She even convinced a local artist to donate a mural for the Phoenix's lobby, a vibrant depiction of Riverton's forgotten communities rising together. Henry watched her work, his heart a battleground of pride and pain. One evening, as they walked the site, she spoke softly. "I know I hurt you, Dad. I was selfish, scared. But I'm here now. I want to make this right." Henry stopped, his eyes on the horizon where the Phoenix's silhouette stood against the setting sun. "You can't undo the past, Lily," he said, his voice rough. "But you can build something new. That's what I'm doing. That's what we're doing." She nodded, tears in her eyes. And for the first time, Henry felt a crack in the wall between them. He didn't reach for her, but he didn't turn away either. It was a start. As the Phoenix's walls rose, so did Crane's desperation. He sent lawyers to challenge Henry's permits, claiming environmental violations. The accusations were baseless, but they tied up resources and time. Henry and Maria fought back, presenting evidence of the site's safety and compliance. The city council, under pressure from Crane's allies, dragged its feet, but public support for the Phoenix was growing. Protests erupted outside City Hall, led by residents who saw the Phoenix as a beacon of hope. Henry stood among them, his voice joining theirs, a man no longer invisible. The battle was far from over, but Henry felt a fire he hadn't known in years. The Phoenix was his redemption, his defiance, his legacy. And no one, not Crane, not the city, not the ghosts of his past, would take it from him. The Phoenix was nearly complete, its glass facade gleaming under Riverton's gray skies. Henry walked the halls, his boots echoing on polished floors, his heart swelling with a pride he hadn't felt in decades. The apartments were simple but warm, designed with care for those who'd never had a place to call home. The lobby's mural, a gift from the community, told a story of resilience, its colors vibrant against the stark reality of the city outside. But the closer the Phoenix came to opening, the fiercer Victor Crane's attacks became. Crane's latest move was a smear campaign. Articles appeared in local papers, painting Henry as a delusional old man, a drifter with no business challenging Riverton's elite. They questioned the Phoenix's funding, hinting at fraud, and cast doubt on its safety. Henry knew Crane was behind it. The articles quoted his allies, men in suits who'd never set foot in the neighborhoods the Phoenix was built for. The lies stung, but Henry refused to let them take root. He held a press conference, standing in front of the Phoenix with Maria and Lily by his side, and spoke directly to the city. "I was one of you," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I worked. I loved. I lost. This city turned its back on me. But I'm still here. The Phoenix is for everyone who's been forgotten, everyone who deserves a second chance." The crowd roared, their voices drowning out the reporters' skeptical questions. Social media erupted, with Phoenix Rising trending on X. People shared stories of their own struggles, of being pushed out by rising rents and a city that valued profit over people. Henry became a symbol, not just of survival, but of defiance. The Phoenix wasn't just a building. It was a movement. Crane, however, wasn't deterred. One night, a fire broke out at the construction site. It was small, contained quickly by the fire department. But the damage was done. A section of the lobby was charred, and the mural was ruined. The police called it an accident, but Henry knew better. He found a canister of accelerant hidden behind a dumpster, its label partially burned but traceable to a supplier linked to Crane's company. Maria took the evidence to the authorities, but Crane's influence ran deep. The investigation stalled, and Henry's frustration grew. Lily, sensing his anger, stepped in. "We can't let him win, Dad," she said, her voice fierce. "We rebuild the lobby. We make it better. And we open on time." Henry looked at her, seeing Clara's fire in her eyes. He nodded. "You're right. We keep going." The community rallied. Artists volunteered to recreate the mural, and donations poured in to cover repairs. Henry worked alongside them, his hands steady despite his age. Lily organized fundraisers, her energy infectious. Slowly, the Phoenix healed, its scars a testament to its strength. But Henry knew Crane wouldn't stop. The man's empire was built on control, and the Phoenix threatened that. One evening, as Henry locked up the site, a car pulled up. Two men stepped out, their faces hidden in the shadows. Crane sends a message. One said, his voice low, "Back off, or the next fire won't be so small." Henry's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "Tell Crane he's wasting his time. I'm not going anywhere." The men exchanged a glance, then left without another word. Henry's hands shook as he called Maria, who urged him to go to the police. But Henry knew the law wouldn't touch Crane not yet. Instead, he doubled down on security, hiring more guards and installing floodlights. He also reached out to a journalist, Sarah, who'd been covering the Phoenix's rise. She was young, hungry for a story, and unafraid of Crane's influence. Henry gave her the canister, along with documents Maria had uncovered linking Crane to the missing materials and zoning disputes. Sarah's article hit like a thunderbolt. Headlined, "The Man Who Would Burn Riverton." It exposed Crane's tactics, quoting workers and residents who'd seen his men near the site. The public outcry was immediate. Protests grew outside the Grayson Tower, with tenants demanding answers. Crane's polished facade began to crack, but Henry knew better than to celebrate. Men like Crane didn't fall easily. Lily, meanwhile, was becoming more than a helper. She'd taken on a leadership role, coordinating with tenants and planning the Phoenix's opening. Henry watched her, his heart a tangle of pride and pain. One night, as they sat in the nearly finished lobby, she spoke. "I know I can't make up for what I did, Dad. But being here, seeing what you're doing gets given me purpose. I want to be part of this. For you. For them." Henry's throat tightened. "You're here now?" he said. "That's what matters." The Phoenix's opening was set for a month away, and Henry could feel the city's pulse shifting. The people were with him, but Crane was still out there, a predator waiting for his moment. Henry wasn't naive. He knew the fight was far from over. But as he stood in the Phoenix's lobby, the new mural rising behind him, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The Phoenix's opening day loomed, a beacon of hope in a city that had long forgotten how to dream. Henry spent his days finalizing details, leases signed, utilities connected, tenants chosen from a list of hundreds who'd applied. The Phoenix was more than a building now. It was a home for the elderly, the struggling, the forgotten. Each tenant's story mirrored Henry's own lives, battered by circumstance, but unbowed by it. He met them all, shaking hands, listening to their stories, promising them a place where they'd be seen. But Victor Crane wasn't finished. His empire was faltering under the weight of Sarah's articles and the growing public support for the Phoenix. Tenants in the Grayson Tower began moving out, drawn to the Phoenix's promise of affordability and community. Crane's response was swift and brutal. He filed a lawsuit against Henry, claiming the Phoenix violated city codes. The accusations were flimsy, but they forced Henry and Maria into court, draining resources and time. Crane's lawyers were relentless, their polished arguments a stark contrast to Henry's raw determination. Maria fought like a lion, dismantling their claims with evidence and passion. But the stress was taking its toll. Henry saw it in her tired eyes, in the way her hands shook as she flipped through legal briefs. "We're close, Henry," she said one night, her voice hoarse. "He's desperate. That's why he's doing this." Henry nodded, but his own exhaustion was creeping in. He was 70 now, his body protesting the long hours and endless battles. Yet he couldn't stop. The Phoenix was his redemption, his proof that the world hadn't broken him. And there was Lily, who'd become his anchor. She handled tenant relations, organized community events, and stood by his side in court. Her presence was a reminder of what he'd lost and what he might still reclaim. The night before the opening, Henry received a call from Sarah. "I've got something," she said, her voice urgent. "Meet me at the diner on 5th. Henry arrived to find her with a stack of documents, her eyes alight with excitement. "These are emails," she said, sliding them across the table. "Crane's been bribing city officials to block your permits. And there's more proof. He ordered the fire. Henry's heart raced as he read the emails. They were damning, linking Crane to the sabotage and the smear campaign. Sarah had risked everything to get them, hacking into a server with the help of an anonymous source. "Publish this," Henry said, his voice steady. "Let the world see who he is." The article dropped the morning of the Phoenix's opening. Headlined, "Crane's Corruption, the Plot to Burn the Phoenix." It laid bare his crimes. The city erupted. Protests swarmed the Grayson Tower. And the police, under pressure, opened an investigation. Crane's allies abandoned him, their own reputations at stake. By midday, he was arrested, his smug facade replaced by panic as he was led away in handcuffs. Henry stood in the Phoenix's lobby, the new mural glowing behind him. The tenants had gathered, their faces a mix of joy and disbelief. Lily was there, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The mayor, eager to distance himself from Crane, attended the opening, praising Henry's vision. But Henry didn't care about the applause. He cared about the people around him, the old woman who'd baked him bread, the young man who'd worked at the site, the families who'd found a home. As he cut the ribbon, Henry's voice broke. "This is for us," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "For everyone who's been told they don't matter. We matter. And we're not going anywhere." The crowd cheered, their voices a chorus of triumph. Lily hugged him, her tears soaking his shoulder. For the first time in years, Henry let himself feel the weight of her love, the possibility of forgiveness. The Phoenix was open, and with it, a new chapter had begun. But the victory wasn't complete. Crane's trial loomed, and Henry knew the man's wealth could still buy influence. The Phoenix was safe for now, but the city was a battlefield, and Henry had made enemies. He didn't care. He'd faced worse than Crane and survived. The Phoenix was his legacy, a testament to his resilience, and he'd fight for it until his last breath. That night, as the tenants celebrated in the community room, Henry stepped outside. The city's lights glittered, no longer mocking but welcoming. He thought of Clara, of the promises they'd made. He thought of Lily, of the future they might build. And he thought of the streets that had once claimed him. They hadn't broken him. They'd forged him. The Phoenix thrived in the months that followed. Its apartments were full, its community room a hub of laughter and shared meals. Henry walked its halls daily, greeting tenants by name, listening to their stories. The old woman who'd given him bread now ran a weekly baking class. The young man who'd helped at the site was studying to become an electrician, his rent covered by a scholarship Henry had created. The Phoenix wasn't just a building. It was a family, bound by struggle and hope. Victor Crane's trial was a spectacle. The evidence was overwhelming, and the public's outrage ensured justice. He was convicted of arson, bribery, and fraud, sentenced to years behind bars. The Grayson Tower, once a symbol of his power, began to falter. Tenants left in droves, drawn to the Phoenix's warmth and affordability. Henry saw the irony but took no pleasure in it. His fight had never been about revenge. It was about redemption. Lily became the Phoenix's manager, her energy and compassion shaping its future. She and Henry grew closer, their conversations a careful dance around the past. One evening, as they sat in the lobby, she handed him a photo. It was of her as a child, laughing in his arms, Clara smiling beside them. "I kept this," she said, her voice soft. "It reminded me of what we had." Henry's eyes stung as he took the photo. "We can't go back," he said, his voice rough. "But we can go forward." Lily nodded, her hand finding his. "I'd like that, Dad." The city changed around the Phoenix. Other developers, inspired or shamed by Henry's success, began building affordable housing. Community groups flourished, and Riverton's forgotten corners found their voice. Henry spoke at city council meetings, advocating for the marginalized, his presence a quiet force. He was no longer invisible, no longer the man the streets had claimed. But Henry's body was tiring. At 71, the years of hardship had left their mark. He ignored the aches, the shortness of breath, determined to see the Phoenix thrive. One morning, as he sat in the community room, a tenant's child ran to him, offering a drawing of a bird rising from flames. "It's you, Mr. Henry," the girl said, her smile bright. Henry's heart swelled, and he knew this was his legacy, not just the building, but the lives it had touched. That night, Henry walked to the roof of the Phoenix, the city sprawling below. The Grayson Tower stood in the distance, its lights dimmed, a relic of a fading empire. Henry thought of the awning where he'd once sheltered, of the rain that had felt like judgment. He thought of Clara, of Lily, of the tenants who called the Phoenix home. He'd been broken, discarded, left to rot. But he'd risen, and in doing so, he'd lifted others with him. Henry's story wasn't over, but he knew his time was finite. He'd asked Lily to take over the Phoenix when he was gone, to carry its mission forward. She'd agreed, her eyes fierce with purpose. As he stood on the roof, the wind cool against his face, Henry felt at peace. The streets hadn't claimed him. The city hadn't broken him. He'd built something lasting, something good. And in the end, that was enough.